The street was quiet. It was late. She had no idea someone was waiting for her in the shadows. Within seconds, the calm was shattered. There was a sudden noise, a shift in her voice, and then silence. What followed was so violent, so planned, that investigators were left stunned. But the most disturbing part? She had warned everyone this could happen, and no one stopped it. Born and raised in Italy, Alessandra Matteuzzi had spent most of her life immersed in the world of fashion. At 56, she worked as a sales representative for a boutique that specialized in women's clothing. Those who knew her best described her as dependable, thoughtful, and refined. She brought precision and grace to everything she did, whether it was assisting a client or caring for a loved one. Alessandra was known for her deep compassion. Her sense of responsibility extended beyond her career. For years, she had been her father's primary caregiver during his final illness, offering unwavering support until his death. The experience left her emotionally drained. After his passing, she withdrew socially, turning inward and hesitating to pursue new relationships. Her mother, who lived in a care home and needed constant assistance, became the center of her daily life. Alessandra maintained a steady routine that included frequent visits to her mother and daily phone calls with her younger sister Stefania, with whom she shared an unshakable bond. Despite her reserved nature, Alessandra maintained an online presence. Her social media accounts revealed glimpses of a peaceful, structured life, photos from family gatherings, elegant outfits from work, and quiet moments at home with her pet. She was not reclusive, but she preferred calm settings and meaningful connections over large crowds or spontaneous socializing. Her world had become smaller, yet it remained deeply personal and intimate. That world shifted in the summer of 2021. It began, like many modern connections do, through social media. Alessandra came across the profile of a young man named Giovanni Padovani. Born in Sicily, Padovani was 26 years old and living a very different life. A professional football player with a side career in modeling, he was active and widely followed online. His posts often featured training clips, travel photos, and behind-the-scenes looks at photo shoots. His digital persona was polished, charming, and widely admired, especially by women. There was nothing about his profile that appeared suspicious. If anything, his openness and approachable tone gave the impression of someone self-assured but grounded. Despite their significant age gap, the initial interaction between Alessandra and Giovanni unfolded with surprising ease. He was respectful and kind, never dismissive or arrogant. Over time, their messages grew more frequent, moving from simple greetings to longer exchanges about daily life and personal thoughts. As their digital conversations evolved into real emotional exchanges, the bond deepened. They communicated almost daily, sharing photos, life updates, and words of encouragement. Eventually, Giovanni arranged to visit Alessandra in person. He traveled to Bologna, where she lived, and spent several days getting to know her in her own environment. He was gentle, observant, and never overstepped. One gesture in particular stood out. He offered to visit Alessandra's mother at the care home. That moment, simple yet meaningful, left a lasting impression. It suggested that he wasn't merely interested in Alessandra, but in the life she had built and the people she loved. In the months that followed, Giovanni continued to visit Bologna. He and Alessandra shared quiet moments, walking through the city, cooking meals, running errands together. He accompanied her in her routines and seemed to enjoy the slower pace of her world. He appeared to care deeply, capturing moments together in photos he sometimes posted online. In private messages, he offered her encouragement and affection. To those observing from the outside, it may have seemed like an unexpected but tender relationship, two very different lives finding common ground. But not long after the new year, that sense of security began to unravel. Padovani's tone shifted. He began calling more often, sometimes several times a day, and his questions became unusually specific. What once felt like affectionate curiosity turned into suspicion. He demanded to know whom she was speaking with, what she was doing, and why. Their chats transformed into interrogations, laced with doubt. Then came the accusations. He insisted she was hiding things from him, details, people, conversations. None of it had any foundation. His fixation didn't stop with Alessandra. He started calling Stefania directly, attempting to convince her of his distorted view of reality. He pleaded for her support, but as his behavior grew more erratic, his tone shifted from persuasion to aggression. Stefania remembered him yelling during phone calls, his voice raised, accusations flying. She eventually made the difficult decision to cut contact altogether. Alessandra, on the other hand, held on. She believed the storm would pass. She didn't argue or provoke. Instead, she tried to calm things, to restore balance. But the man who had once seemed so emotionally in tune began pushing further into her life. His jealousy took root. Casual social media activity, likes, photos, comments, triggered new rounds of conflict. He demanded explanations for even the smallest digital interactions. As his obsession grew, so did his need to control. He started calling at all hours of the night. His messages, once sweet, became a torrent, urgent, aimless, and constant, sometimes angry, sometimes apologetic. Alessandra's peace was shattered. His mood swings were exhausting, his expectations impossible. And yet, he continued to embed himself into her life in increasingly invasive ways. In early 2022, the situation escalated. After one of his visits, Alessandra noticed something was wrong with her digital accounts. She had been locked out of her email and social media profiles. Attempts to recover them revealed that the new passwords contained clues, phrases, and references connected directly to Giovanni. She suspected he had accessed her computer. The deeper she looked, the worse it became. Her WhatsApp account had been linked to a foreign device, and spyware was later discovered on her phone. This software wasn't just for monitoring, it gave Giovanni the ability to read her messages, review her call logs, and track her location in real time. His surveillance wasn't incidental, it was systematic and deliberate. That suspicion was confirmed when he began referencing private conversations, ones Alessandra had never shared with him. He knew who she had talked to and when. He confronted her with twisted interpretations of her digital interactions, convinced she was being unfaithful, even in the absence of any evidence. The intensity of his delusions only grew. He demanded proof of her whereabouts, short videos sent every 10 minutes. These clips were meant to verify where she was and who she was with. Refusing to comply brought out his rage. He'd threaten to end the relationship, accuse her of betrayal, or bombard her with messages until she gave in. His tone became cold, authoritarian. Alessandra no longer felt like a participant in the relationship. She felt surveilled, evaluated, and trapped. Then came the most chilling revelation. Giovanni had somehow gained access to her home surveillance system. A screenshot he shared in a message to his mother, a still image of Alessandra from inside her apartment, confirmed it. He had been watching her, live, inside the place she once considered safe. The violation was total. By mid-2022, Giovanni's behavior had turned openly predatory. He wasn't just watching online, he began following her in person. He loitered near her apartment building in Bologna, appearing at odd hours without warning. Neighbors noticed. One resident spotted him trying to enter the complex. Another saw him on the roof. He was no longer hiding his intentions. Alessandra warned her neighbors not to open the door for him. Her life was now ruled by anxiety. He had become unpredictable, volatile. And then came the damage. Her car was tampered with, its lights disabled by cut wiring. Her apartment lost power after someone had removed the fuses. These weren't just acts of vandalism. They were calculated provocations designed to force her into physical proximity with him. There were sounds of shouting, heavy thuds against her walls, items in her home smashed or broken. At one point, he climbed back onto the roof, attempting another break-in. His jealousy, once disguised as affection, had spiraled into obsession. All boundaries had been obliterated. The woman who had once lived a quiet, structured life, rooted in routine, family, and compassion, was now living in a state of constant fear. Alessandra was no longer in a relationship. She was being hunted. She began carrying pepper spray. It was a small shift, but for a woman who had once lived with grace and self-assurance, it marked a major emotional rupture. Fear had settled into every part of her day. She told friends and family that returning home filled her with anxiety. Occasionally, she found refuge at her sister Stefania's house. Though the temporary relief never lasted, her dog remained behind in the apartment, and for Alessandra, leaving him behind entirely wasn't an option. That emotional tether forced her back, again and again, into the orbit of danger. Between July and August, the situation became increasingly volatile. Alessandra confided in Stefania, sharing incidents of intimidation and escalating aggression. Still, even amid the fear, she continued looking for ways to diffuse the situation. She avoided direct confrontation, perhaps hoping that silence or calm might blunt the obsession. But Giovanni responded to her distance not with withdrawal, but with escalation. He took it as an affront, something that needed correcting. On July 29, 2022, Alessandra made her first formal move toward protection. She filed a police report documenting Giovanni's obsessive behavior, the repeated intrusions into her privacy, and his increasingly erratic presence around her home. She came prepared, with screenshots of messages, photos of him near her residence, and details of the stalking that had defined her recent months. But no urgent measures were taken. Days passed. The fear didn't subside. On August 3rd, she returned to the police with new evidence, additional sightings, further interference. Once again, she shared her concerns. But the case remained in an early phase. Investigators noted her claims but made no protective recommendations. There was no restraining order, no formal warning, no police presence near her building. By August 8th, she was back again. The harassment hadn't stopped. Giovanni continued to appear near her home and attempted to enter the building. She documented each new incident, the car damage, the power disruptions, and the attempted break-ins. His messages were growing more hostile. Still, the official response remained unchanged. A fourth visit came on August 13th. Alessandra, by then, was exhausted and terrified. She was being watched, followed, and digitally tracked. Giovanni's control extended into her private communications and daily routines. She made it clear she feared for her life. She gave police direct quotes from his messages, words filled with threats and psychological manipulation. One of her statements stood out with horrifying clarity. "I don't want to die." It was more than a plea. It was a warning. But even this wasn't enough to spur decisive action. Authorities pointed to procedural limitations. More witness statements were required. Some delays, they said, were due to vacation schedules. Investigators downplayed the danger. Because there had been no physical attack, some viewed the case as merely harassment, not as a precursor to violence. They underestimated what was unfolding in plain sight. Her family would later challenge that failure. They argued that the warnings had been clear, consistent, and serious. The progression was obvious. What began as digital obsession had become physical intimidation. Giovanni's behavior was no longer reactive. It was calculated, repetitive, dangerous. And then came the clearest evidence of all. On August 20th, 2022, just 3 days before the final act, Giovanni created a checklist on his phone. Investigators would later find it in his Notes app. The list wasn't vague. It included specific items: duct tape, a hammer, restraints. Beneath that was a written plan: simulate a conversation, find a way to get inside, bring the necessary tools. The level of detail removed any doubt about his intentions. This wasn't spontaneous rage. It was methodical planning. On August 21st, Giovanni left Sicily, where he had been engaged in football-related activities, and traveled to Senigallia under the guise of personal business. From there, he continued his journey, ultimately arriving in Bologna on August 22nd. Digital records would later confirm Giovanni's movements in chilling detail. He had slipped into Bologna quietly, informing no one, not even Alessandra. After arriving on August 22nd, 2022, he hid a hammer in a bush close to Alessandra's apartment building, strategically placed in a secluded corner of the residential complex. He had scouted the area in advance, carefully planning each step. At some point that same day, he climbed to the rooftop of the building. From above, he watched and waited, tracking Alessandra's comings and goings. This surveillance was not new. He had been monitoring her for months. But this time, he was no longer satisfied with watching. Weeks earlier, Giovanni had written a note in his phone. Dated July 2nd, it read, "I'll end her because she ended me emotionally." In it, he painted himself as a victim, claiming he had been manipulated, discarded, and driven to the edge. He admitted full awareness of the consequences. "I know I'll end up in prison. This note will explain to the police what she did to me." His intentions were unmistakable. What was about to happen had been decided long before he made the trip north. On the evening of August 23rd, Alessandra returned home, unaware that Giovanni was nearby. It was just after 9 p.m. She was speaking on the phone with her sister Stefania, a routine conversation between two women whose connection had always been rooted in trust. As Alessandra approached the building entrance, Giovanni stepped out from his hiding spot. The assault began in seconds. Stefania, still on the call, heard a sudden shift. Alessandra's voice changed, followed by the unmistakable sounds of a violent struggle. In that brief moment, everything unraveled. Witnesses later recounted seeing Giovanni lunge at her. He retrieved the hidden hammer and delivered a blow so forceful that the head of the tool snapped from the handle. But the attack didn't stop there. Giovanni continued beating her with his fists, then lifted a heavy wrought iron bench, situated just outside the entrance, and used it to strike her again and again. He acted with explosive violence, delivering multiple crushing blows. Forensic reports would later reveal over 20 traumatic injuries. Alessandra's skull, chest, arms, and legs bore the marks of a brutal assault. Her body was found with signs of blunt force trauma, deep fractures, and evidence she had been dragged across the ground. Despite the noise, despite the commotion, he made no attempt to escape. When police arrived, he was sitting near the building's front door, waiting. Officers described him as calm, his demeanor eerily composed. "Good thing you came," he said upon arrest. There was no struggle, no signs of remorse, only a chilling acceptance of what he had done. Alessandra was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. The injuries were catastrophic. She died within minutes of arrival. The evidence left no room for doubt. His actions were methodical. There was no effort to cover his tracks or disguise the crime. The precision, the timing, the location of the weapon, everything indicated premeditation. Witnesses described him as swift and unwavering, moving with the certainty of someone who had rehearsed it in his mind many times. Stefania's phone call, along with the physical and digital trail, became critical in reconstructing the exact sequence of events. The entire attack lasted only a few minutes, but it was the culmination of months of calculated psychological torment. Following his arrest, Giovanni was transferred to a psychiatric facility. He initially invoked his right to remain silent, but later made statements in which he blamed Alessandra for the outcome. He claimed emotional devastation, saying she had broken him. Investigators, however, saw through the facade. The crime had been planned, documented, and executed with chilling precision. Though his defense team pushed for a psychiatric evaluation, the court-appointed experts found him to be fully aware of his actions. He exhibited obsessive behavior and a pattern of control, but he did not meet the criteria for legal insanity. His mind was intact, his intentions were conscious. At sentencing, Giovanni spoke briefly. He called the experience a nightmare and told the court that if they believed he was sane, he deserved the harshest penalty. He tried to cast himself as a shattered man, but the court was unmoved. His victim-blaming narrative collapsed under the weight of the evidence. On February 12, 2024, Giovanni was found guilty of stalking and the premeditated murder of Alessandra Matteuzzi. He was sentenced to life in prison. The court cited aggravating factors: the extreme cruelty of the attack, his lack of remorse, and the extensive psychological abuse that preceded the crime. The aftermath didn't end in the courtroom. After Alessandra's death, a wave of online hostility emerged, targeting her. On social media, cruel comments flooded the news articles. Strangers mocked her appearance, her clothing, her age, and the age gap between her and Giovanni. Some even suggested she had provoked him. Among the most shocking was a public comment from Donatello Alberti, a regional Red Cross official, who insinuated that her appearance justified his jealousy. The backlash was immediate. Alberti was swiftly removed from his position. Alessandra's family took action. They filed complaints against 25 individuals for their online abuse, and the Bologna prosecutor's office launched a rare and unprecedented investigation into posthumous cyber harassment. The case set a new legal precedent in Italy, marking one of the first times digital defamation against a deceased victim had been prosecuted at scale. In the eyes of the court and the public, Giovanni's crime was not just a murder. It was the endpoint of a long campaign of control, psychological, digital, physical, and a tragic illustration of a system that didn't act in time. Experts later identified his behavior as classic Othello syndrome, a pathological condition marked by delusional jealousy. Unlike ordinary jealousy, this disorder involves obsessive thoughts, irrational suspicion of infidelity, and a refusal to accept reality. In its most severe forms, it leads to violence. And for Alessandra Matteucci, it led to her death.
Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.
It was a quiet Saturday night in Santa Monica when a strange 911 call came in. Panicked, cut off mid-sentence. Just a few minutes later, a neighbor heard loud noises from a nearby bungalow, like furniture being knocked over. But no one checked. No one knew what was really happening. The next day, police showed up to the small apartment. What they found inside was shocking. A young woman, full of dreams, was lying lifeless in her bedroom. The gas had been left on. A candle was still burning. But nothing looked forced or broken. So who had been there? What really happened that night? As investigators searched for answers, they uncovered a story filled with money, jealousy, and secrets. One that would leave everyone wondering if justice was ever truly served. Juliana Redding was born on October the 25th, 1986, in Dallas, Texas, into a close-knit Catholic family. Raised alongside her younger brother Patrick by their devoted parents, Patricia and Greg Redding, Juliana grew up surrounded by strong values and a deep connection to her faith. From a young age, she stood out, not only for her remarkable beauty, but for her joyful nature and the magnetic charm that drew people to her. Her early childhood was marked by warmth, laughter, and ambition. Even as a little girl, Juliana seemed at ease in adult settings, often accompanying her grandmother to board meetings and delighting in the formal atmosphere. She adored her dolls, loved working with children, and had an especially close bond with her brother. Juliana's upbringing was filled with activities that shaped her vibrant spirit. At South Point Catholic High School, she excelled academically and athletically, participating in track, soccer, theater, and golf, where she helped lead the school team to a state title. She was a member of the recycling club, served on the student council, and assisted at her church as a preschool teacher. Her teachers described her as kind, respectful, and a natural leader. She had dreams of becoming both an entrepreneur and an actress, blending her intellectual ambition with her artistic flair. By 2005, she had already performed with the Tucson Symphony and landed a role in an independent film titled Katiti, filmed in Atlanta. In 2006, eager to chase her Hollywood dreams, Juliana moved to California. She settled in a cozy, bungalow-style apartment on Centinela Avenue in Santa Monica, just minutes from the glamour of Sunset Boulevard in Beverly Hills. While she studied communications at Santa Monica College, she worked as a hostess in upscale restaurants and picked up part-time jobs as a bartender and waitress, always keeping her eyes on opportunities in acting and modeling. With her chestnut hair and captivating looks, Juliana began to draw attention in the entertainment industry. In early 2008, she was reportedly in talks to appear in a feature for Maxim magazine, an opportunity that could have launched her into wider recognition, but her dreams were cut short in the most devastating way. On the night of March 15, 2008, Juliana made a call to emergency services around 10 p.m., but the line abruptly went dead. A neighbor later reported hearing the sounds of furniture being knocked over shortly before the call. No one realized at the time that Juliana may have been fighting for her life. The next day, her mother, unable to reach her by phone, became increasingly alarmed. Patricia contacted the Santa Monica Police Department and requested a welfare check. Officer Scott McGowan was among the first to arrive at the apartment. He heard Juliana's dog barking from inside, but there was no answer at the door. Then he noticed a disturbing detail: the distinct smell of gas. The fire department was called, and officers forced entry into the apartment. Inside, they discovered an extinguished pilot light on the stove, a burner open, and a candle still flickering, signs that the apartment had been filled with gas for hours, posing a grave risk of explosion. What they found next was even more horrifying. From the kitchen, Officer Gowan could see into the bedroom. Juliana lay lifeless on the bed. Her body showed signs of having been deceased for several hours. Purple discoloration along her lower limbs, a grim indicator of post-mortem lividity. The scene suggested a violent struggle. Investigators documented signs of a fight and collected a wide array of DNA samples, from door handles, kitchenware, and even Juliana's shirt. One of the most critical samples came from beneath her fingernails. Initially, speculation in the media suggested a blunt force trauma as the cause of death, but the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office later issued a correction. The cause of death would remain sealed, though the manner of death was confirmed to be homicide. In a chilling twist, forensic evidence indicated that the DNA beneath her fingernails matched Juliana herself, suggesting she had clawed at her own neck in a desperate attempt to loosen the grip of her attacker, likely during an attempt to strangle her. Law enforcement remained tight-lipped about the investigation, guarding details closely in order to preserve the integrity of the case. The public, meanwhile, was left stunned by the loss of a bright, beautiful young woman whose life had seemed full of promise and purpose. As forensic teams combed through the violent crime scene at Juliana Redding's Santa Monica apartment and lab technicians analyzed the biological evidence, another part of the investigation was quietly unfolding. Detectives were reaching out to friends and family members, hoping personal insights could unlock the mystery behind her shocking death. One name quickly surfaced: John Gilmore. According to Juliana's father, Greg Redding, this was the man she had dated on and off for the past 2 years, a relationship he had never approved of. Greg told investigators that John had a temper and a history of aggressive behavior. On one occasion, he said, John kicked in Juliana's car door. On another, he reportedly forced his way into her home after an argument. Given that many violent crimes against women are committed by someone close to the victim, the police wasted no time speaking with Gilmore. He admitted that the relationship had been turbulent and confirmed they'd argued on the night of March 15th, the same night Juliana was murdered. But he insisted it had only been a phone fight after Juliana got upset about his decision to go out with friends. According to him, she hung up on him, then went out with a friend of her own. He claimed to have attended a house party several miles away and exchanged text messages with Juliana until 10 p.m., when her replies suddenly stopped. Gilmore stated that he went to Juliana's bungalow the next morning but left after getting no response. Through the security gate, he claimed to see a candle flickering inside. Though suspicion initially focused on him, Gilmore was soon cleared. Surveillance footage confirmed his presence at a store and two other locations that night. Several witnesses also placed him at a party during the critical time frame between 9:45 and 10:15 p.m. Moreover, forensic investigators had discovered something that shifted the focus entirely. The DNA found at the crime scene belonged to a woman. With this revelation, investigators began exploring whether someone close to Juliana might have been jealous or harbored resentment. Female acquaintances were questioned and DNA samples collected, but none matched. In the meantime, Juliana's family held a funeral mass on March 28th at the St. Thomas the Apostle Church in Tucson. Friends, relatives, and former classmates gathered to mourn a young woman who had lived her short life with purpose and joy. Those who knew her spoke not just of her beauty, but of her kindness, ambition, and spirited nature. Although it seemed the case was stalling, detectives were quietly delving deeper into Juliana's personal and professional connections. And that's when another key figure emerged. Dr. Munir Uwaida, a wealthy Lebanese-born surgeon nearly 20 years her senior. Munir had grown up in Beirut, the son of a prominent doctor, and by the time he met Juliana in 2007, he was living a lavish lifestyle in Los Angeles. The two met while Juliana was working as a hostess in a high-end restaurant. Struck by her presence, Munir offered her a job as an assistant at his medical clinic. She accepted, and soon their relationship became more than professional. Juliana moved into one of Munir's homes in Beverly Hills and began driving a white Range Rover he gave her. He showered her with luxury, watches, designer clothes, vacations, and even once offered to buy her a Lamborghini for her 21st birthday. Friends observed that Munir was infatuated, bordering on obsessed. He even discussed marriage. Munir also sought a professional alliance with Juliana's father, Greg, who was a pharmacist. He proposed launching a pharmaceutical business called Golden State Pharmaceuticals, with Greg as its director. But Juliana, still young and pursuing her own dreams in acting and school, eventually felt overwhelmed. She ended the relationship and moved into the Santa Monica bungalow, a space she could afford only with help from her father. Although the romance had ended, contact between Juliana and Munir did not. In fact, she had recently gone on a birthday trip to Las Vegas with him and some friends. However, the celebratory mood didn't last. Around that time, Greg informed Juliana that he had discovered something troubling. Munir was married and had 3 children in Lebanon. Feeling betrayed, Juliana broke off all contact. Despite personal tensions, the business negotiations between Munir and Greg continued until March 2008. But shortly before Juliana's death, Greg decided to pull out of the deal. His lawyers had concerns about the legality and structure of the company and sent a letter formally ending their involvement. According to their statement, the compensation Munir offered was enticing, but not worth the professional and ethical risks. Interestingly, Munir's legal team later claimed that it was he who ended the negotiations. Just days after those negotiations fell apart, Juliana was found dead. Naturally, investigators considered whether there could be a link between the failed business deal and the murder. But Munir had a strong alibi. He was out of the country at the time of Juliana's death. And crucially, the DNA found at the scene still pointed to a woman, not a man. Despite being cleared as a direct suspect in Juliana Redding's murder, Dr. Munir Uwaida remained on investigators' radar. The police strongly suspected that someone in his inner circle may have been involved in the young woman's death. They began a focused investigation into the women who worked closely with him, and one name quickly rose to the top: Kelly Sue Park. At 44 years old, Kelly was a real estate agent and a personal assistant to Munir in various business ventures. What drew the detectives' attention was a troubling financial pattern. From June 2008 onward, Kelly received over $1 million from Munir in a span of just 18 months. Most notably, she had received a $250,000 payment only 3 weeks before Juliana's murder, an amount that raised red flags. Police surveillance of Kelly intensified. In one operation, investigators collected a discarded cigarette she smoked. DNA tests confirmed a chilling match. Her genetic material was found at the crime scene. On June 17, 2010, more than 2 years after Juliana's death, authorities moved in. Kelly and her partner Ronnie were arrested without incident in California. Although public records listed them as residents of Thousand Oaks, Kelly was transported to Los Angeles, where she appeared in court on June 21st. Prosecutors charged her with the 2008 murder of Juliana Redding, alleging she had entered Juliana's Santa Monica apartment on the night of March 15th and physically assaulted her, resulting in death. Her bail was set at $1 million, and if convicted, she faced 25 years to life in prison. Ronnie, though taken into custody, was released without charges. The media, long frustrated by the secrecy surrounding the case, soon uncovered another startling development. Just 2 days after Kelly's arrest, Dr. Munir Uweda disappeared from Los Angeles. He was believed to have fled to Beirut, though at that point he faced no formal charges related to Juliana's death. In October 2010, a secret grand jury hearing was held over the course of 3 days to assess the evidence against Kelly. For nearly 2 years, the case had been shielded in confidentiality, but in December, the Los Angeles Times obtained and published a transcript of the grand jury proceedings, revealing critical details for the first time. Testimonies included statements from detectives, forensic specialists, and the medical examiner. They described the violent struggle inside Juliana's apartment and how the killer attempted to destroy the evidence. According to prosecutors, the gas left on and the candle still burning in the living room were part of a deliberate plan to ignite an explosion, an attempt to obliterate any trace of the crime. The forensic pathologist described the trauma inflicted on Juliana. Her body was covered in bruises and abrasions. Capillaries in her eyes had burst, a classic sign of strangulation, and the bones in her neck were crushed. Scratch marks under her chin were determined to be self-inflicted, made as she desperately tried to tear her attacker's hands from her throat. The DNA evidence was compelling. Analysts testified that Kelly's DNA was found on Juliana's skin, clothing, cell phone, a stove knob, and even a blood droplet on a dish. Her fingerprints were also discovered on various surfaces in the apartment. Adding another layer to the narrative was the discovery of saliva belonging to actor Brian Van Holt on Juliana's body. He was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony and admitted to having an intimate relationship with Juliana. He told the grand jury that they had been together the night before her death. Despite the intimate link, there was no evidence implicating him in her murder. Prosecutors believed that Kelly and Juliana had never met, but what bound them was Dr. Munir. According to the theory presented, Kelly was acting as Munir's enforcer, sent to intimidate Juliana or pressure her father, Greg Redding, into moving forward with a pharmaceutical business deal that had fallen apart just days earlier. Kelly, nearly 6 feet tall and physically imposing, was described by the prosecution as Munir's female James Bond. The six-figure payment she received shortly before the attack and another large payment made to her relatives just prior to her arrest seemed too well-timed to be dismissed as coincidence. While the grand jury was presented with a compelling theory, some aspects remained unanswered, most notably how detectives had connected Kelly to the case after such a long period and what truly motivated the violent escalation that led to Juliana Redding's murder. As the trial against Kelly Sue Park gained national attention, her defense attorney addressed the court with a simple explanation for the staggering sums of money she had received from Dr. Munir Uwaida. According to him, Kelly was merely a personal real estate agent for the wealthy surgeon, and nothing more, but prosecutors weren't convinced. To them, Munir, the former lover of Juliana Redding, had become the shadowy figure looming behind the entire case. The prosecutor noted that Munir fled the United States the very day Kelly was arrested. Still, without direct evidence tying him to the murder, no communications, no financial trail ordering violence, no physical presence, prosecutors were forced to focus solely on Kelly and the overwhelming DNA evidence found throughout the crime scene. The prosecutor also told the grand jury that Kelly's DNA was found on nearly every surface inside Juliana's Santa Monica bungalow, on her body, clothes, phone, stove knob, even in a droplet of blood on a dish. Convinced that the physical evidence was irrefutable, the grand jury agreed. There was enough to proceed to trial. At the trial, which finally took place in 2013, jurors once again heard a reconstruction of the final, violent moments of Juliana Redding's life. Police, forensic experts, and pathologists described a brutal struggle, a failed attempt to trigger an explosion via gas and a lit candle, and an assault so violent it crushed the young woman's neck bones. The prosecution presented a chilling narrative, supported by DNA, fingerprint, and forensic evidence. They argued that Kelly had been sent by Munir to intimidate Juliana and possibly her father, Greg Redding, into resuming a failed pharmaceutical deal. But their case, though supported by science, had one fatal flaw. It lacked a clear motive and a complete narrative. Why would a woman with no history of violence commit such a gruesome crime? After more than a week of deliberations, the jury returned with its verdict in June 2013. Kelly Sue Park was found not guilty of the murder of Juliana Redding. The courtroom exploded in emotion. Kelly, now 47, broke into tears as the verdict was read. Her supporters wept with relief. But behind her, Juliana's friends and family sobbed in anger and disbelief. Some shouted at Kelly to go to hell and accused the jury of turning justice into a farce. The jurors left the building through a back entrance, avoiding the press. They offered no public explanation for their decision. Kelly's attorney later stated that the prosecution had relied too heavily on DNA evidence, failing to establish why or how Kelly would be motivated to kill. He emphasized that DNA only tells you that someone's cells were present. It doesn't tell you why or how they got there. According to him, the prosecution never delivered a logical story that made sense to the jury. Juliana's parents released a written statement of their own, saying the evidence against Kelly was overwhelming and that their daughter had died at the intersection of a failed romance and a shady business deal. But the story of Kelly Sue Park didn't end in that courtroom. Just over 2 years after her acquittal, in August 2015, Park was arrested again, this time along with 12 others, all linked to the criminal empire of Dr. Munir Uwaida. The charges included conspiracy, insurance fraud, aggravated assault, and conducting unauthorized surgeries that defrauded insurance companies of $150 million. Kelly pled not guilty, but the allegations were disturbing. Prosecutors claimed that Munir, who had by then lost his California medical license, had allowed unqualified assistants to perform surgeries, misleading at least 21 patients into believing he was the one operating. Kelly was released on $1.5 million bail while the case developed. Though no new charges directly tied her to Juliana's death, the fraud case overlapped significantly with allegations from the murder trial, namely, that Munir and Kelly had built a multi-layered fraudulent medical empire together. Over the next 5 years, the fraud case moved slowly through the legal system, filled with legal challenges, dropped charges, and reinstated accusations. Charges included aggravated violence, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. But in a twist no one expected, in May 2020, the Los Angeles Superior Court ordered that all charges against Kelly and several others be dismissed. The reason was sealed, and the presiding judge, who had been overseeing the case since 2017, did not publicly explain his decision. For Juliana Redding's family, it was another bitter blow. More than a decade after her death, no one had been held accountable. Her mother, Patricia, an artist who had passed her creativity on to Juliana, found solace in painting. Through art, she tried to reconnect with her daughter's spirit, keeping her memory alive in colors and brushstrokes. Though justice in the legal sense remained elusive, the story of Juliana Redding continues to echo as a chilling example of how ambition, obsession, and money can converge in the darkest of ways, and how sometimes the truth is never enough to convict.
Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.
On a calm Saturday evening in East Hollywood, something terrible happened inside an apartment just a few blocks from the city's busy streets. No one heard anything unusual, no loud noises, no cries for help. But behind that door, a quiet argument had turned into something much worse. When police and firefighters finally got inside, what they found shocked everyone, even the most experienced officers. How did things go so wrong between Kirtland Ma and the man he trusted the most? And what really happened that night? This is the story of a bright future cut short and a tragedy no one saw coming. Kirtland Ma was born on December 24, 1979, in the city of Scottsdale, located in the eastern part of Maricopa County, Arizona. He was the youngest of two sons born to Peggy and Danny Ma, a Chinese-American couple who had earlier welcomed their first son, Waylon Ma. Kirtland's childhood unfolded in a peaceful and loving environment. He was a deeply cherished child, especially by his maternal grandparents, Wingdoy Jimmy and Ellen Lee. With his easygoing nature and warm, constant smile, he had a natural charm that endeared him to everyone, and his grandparents felt truly lucky to call him their grandson. Although he showed early signs of academic potential during elementary school, it was in high school that Kirtland's passion for learning truly flourished. He wasn't just a gifted student, he was also deeply curious, always eager to expand his knowledge beyond the standard curriculum. After his regular school hours, he would attend advanced mathematics classes at another institution, determined to challenge himself further. One afternoon, On his way to one of those extra classes, he met a girl named Anne Chung. Though they attended different schools, they were the same age. A brief conversation that day was enough for Anne to be struck by Kirtland's kind demeanor and witty humor. The feeling was mutual, and from that moment on, the two became inseparable. In their third year of high school, they both transferred to the same school in Phoenix. Not long after, Anne found the courage to tell Kirtland how she truly felt. She believed he was her soulmate and confessed her deep love for him. But Kirtland, though caring, didn't share the same feelings romantically. He loved her like a sister. Anne was heartbroken, but in time, she chose to value their friendship over unrequited love, and they continued their bond as close friends. Meanwhile, Kirtland remained focused on his studies with even greater determination. His academic excellence soon stood out, placing him well above many of his peers. In 1997, he took the standardized school assessment test, a pivotal exam in the U.S. for evaluating students' skills in reading, writing, and math, often critical for university admissions. Kirtland's score came close to the perfect 1600 mark, earning him the prestigious title of Presidential Scholar, an honor reserved for the nation's most outstanding students. Despite his academic drive, Kirtland was far from being all about books and grades. He believed in a well-rounded life, and that balance led him to pursue tennis competitively. He often played in city tournaments, many of which took place at local universities, further showcasing his versatility and discipline. In 1998, Kirtland began a new chapter of his life as he entered Yale University. There, he chose to major in American Studies. Settling into campus life, he was assigned to one of Yale's residential colleges, where he shared a room with Michael. The two quickly became close friends. What stood out most to Michael was Kirtland's unwavering kindness and selfless nature. He was someone who gave without expecting anything in return. Michael had been right about his roommate. Kirtland Ma's calm demeanor, patience, and genuine kindness made him naturally magnetic. Connecting with others came easily to him, not because he tried, but because it was simply who he was. His fellow students at Yale quickly took notice. With his captivating presence, sharp intellect, and unpretentious spirit, Kirtland soon earned not only their respect, but also their friendship. As people got to know him better, many realized he possessed a quiet wisdom that made him a trusted confidant. Friends often turned to him for advice, and Kirtland never let them down. He showed his appreciation not through grand declarations, but through thoughtful gestures. On trips to New York City, just a couple of hours away from campus, he would often return with small gifts for those he cared about. Although he and Anne no longer lived in the same city, their friendship never faded. In one of their many conversations, Anne asked him why he never spoke about dating women. Deep down, she believed his silence was a kind way of sparing her feelings. But she wasn't prepared for the answer Kirtland gave. In a moment of honesty, Kirtland shared a part of himself he had kept private. He simply wasn't attracted to women. With quiet courage, he explained that he was gay. Anne, surprised but open-hearted, listened carefully. Though it saddened her to think that Kirtland hadn't felt safe sharing this earlier, that conversation, free of judgment and full of trust, marked a turning point. It allowed Kirtland to embrace his identity more freely, and from that day forward, he confided in Anne about the men he was dating. When the time came to choose a thesis topic for his undergraduate studies, Kirtland decided to honor both his heritage and his American upbringing. He dove into a project exploring the history of Chinese cuisine in the United States. The result not only highlighted his academic talent, but also earned him the prestigious Henry Hayes Prize, awarded annually to the best senior thesis focused on Asian American experiences. After graduating in 2002, Kirtland set out to fulfill another dream, to see the world. His first stop was China, where he taught English and later participated in a cultural exchange program. This experience took him to Spain, where he lived with a host family and immersed himself in a completely different way of life. Those months abroad gave him clarity about his future. By 2004, Kirtland knew what he wanted next: to become a doctor. Motivated by a deep sense of purpose, he returned to Yale, this time to its School of Medicine. Once again, he stood out for his academic excellence. His medical thesis focused on the application of traditional Chinese medicine in treating HIV patients in Hong Kong. After completing his degree in 2008, Kirtland moved to Manhattan to begin his emergency medicine residency through the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. His training took place at both Jacobi Medical Center and Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx. It was during this time that he met and bonded with Christian, a nurse who would become a close friend. Together, they volunteered with a local organization of about 40 healthcare professionals dedicated to educating New York's LGBTQ+ community about the risks of drug use and unprotected sex. Kirtland's dedication as a doctor became evident when he made a rare and accurate diagnosis involving a patient suffering from an unusual type of fish poisoning. The case was so significant that it was later highlighted in an article in the New York Times. Outside of medicine, Kirtland maintained a vibrant social life. When his schedule allowed, he attended gatherings, parties, and events throughout the city. It was during this active period that he met Andre Damian Davids. Andre, born in 1977, was a New York native. Little is known about his background, but it is documented that he shared a close bond with his sister. In contrast to Kirtland's sociable nature, Andre was more reserved. He was undergoing medical treatment at the time, though the specifics of his condition were never publicly disclosed. What was known was that his treatment involved prescribed medication, often combined dangerously with other substances. Despite their differences in personality, Kirtland and Andre quickly developed a strong mutual attraction. What began as a connection soon deepened into a romantic relationship. Despite his openness in so many aspects of life, Kirtland chose to keep his relationship with Andre private for a long time. Not even his closest friends or family were aware of it. By the time he completed his medical residency, he felt it was time to take a break from the pace of New York City. Longing to reconnect with his family, Kirtland returned to Arizona in July 2012. He moved in temporarily with his parents, Peggy and Danny, grateful to be home again. Rejuvenated by the change of scenery and the support of his loved ones, Kirtland shared his happiness on social media. Soon after, he began working at 2 hospitals in the Phoenix metropolitan area. Though miles apart, his bond with Andre remained strong. He also kept in touch with his friends in New York, often reuniting with them during visits, whether they came to Arizona or he traveled east. Eventually, Andre began accompanying him on these trips, until in 2013 he decided to move to Arizona permanently to be closer to Kirtland. That September, Kirtland posted a photo of the two of them together online, making their relationship public for the first time. The revelation surprised some friends, including Christian, but they warmly welcomed Andre into their circle. They didn't just offer polite gestures, they genuinely tried to include him socially. However, from the outset, Andre seemed reluctant to connect. His jealousy toward Kirtland's friendships gradually became more noticeable. Over time, this possessiveness intensified, and he began asking Kirtland to avoid spending time with his friends. Kirtland, ever the optimist, remained calm. He didn't allow Andre's behavior to derail his own goals. He continued making plans with Christian, even organizing trips together. Rather than be discouraged, Kirtland believed that a new environment might help their relationship. He dreamed of moving to a more open and accepting place for LGBTQ+ people, somewhere they could thrive as a couple. After giving it thoughtful consideration, California seemed like the perfect destination. He was excited by the idea and shared his vision with Andre, assuring him that they would embark on this new chapter together. Once they relocated, Kirtland began working at a hospital in Gardena. Simultaneously, he looked forward to being more active in the LGBTQ+ community. California, with its vibrant culture and inclusivity, felt like the ideal place to do just that. True to his enthusiastic nature, the prospect energized him deeply. In February 2014, the couple rented an apartment in East Hollywood, a lively neighborhood known for its nightlife and diversity. Initially, only Andre moved in, as Kirtland had to make a trip to Japan. But upon returning to the U.S. on March 24th, Kirtland sensed immediately that the change in scenery had done little to repair what was broken. The tensions between them still lingered. For the first time, he seriously contemplated ending the relationship. On the afternoon of Saturday, March 29, 2014, after a restless night for Andre, who had used drugs and barely slept, Kirtland decided it was finally time to have the difficult conversation they had avoided for too long. Calmly, he expressed his dissatisfaction with where things were heading. He admitted he was considering dating other people. Andre, unprepared and unwilling to accept the possibility of separation, refused outright. He also rejected any suggestion of an open relationship, insisting on exclusivity. The conversation quickly escalated into an argument. Tensions flared until both men reached for kitchen knives. What began as a verbal exchange devolved into a physical struggle. Kirtland, in a moment of regained clarity, attempted to de-escalate. But Andre, overtaken by rage, did not stop. In a violent outburst, he seized the weapon and stabbed Kirtland repeatedly, until he collapsed, lifeless. Panicked and unsure of what to do next, Andre called his sister. He told her they had a serious fight, but withheld the horrifying truth of what had just happened. Alarmed by her brother's unstable behavior and fearing he might harm himself, Andre's sister immediately contacted the police, sharing all the information she had. Officers were dispatched to the address she provided to conduct a wellness check. However, when no one responded at the door, they eventually left the scene. As the hours passed and she remained without news, Andre's sister called the police again. This time, officers returned to the apartment, this time with a team of firefighters. At 4:55 p.m. on Saturday, March 29, 2014, both teams forced their way into the apartment in East Hollywood. Inside, they discovered a horrific scene. Kirtland lay lifeless on the kitchen floor, the victim of a brutal assault. In the bathroom, Andre was found sitting in the bathtub, injured and holding a knife, threatening to end his own life. Beside him were his cell phone and a bottle of pills. A police officer quickly secured the weapon, and the fire department team removed Andre from the tub. Andre was transported to a nearby hospital for treatment of wounds to his neck and wrists. Meanwhile, paramedics confirmed that there was nothing they could do for Kirtland. Just before 7 p.m., Los Angeles County coroner officially pronounced him dead. The autopsy revealed the full extent of the brutality Kirtland endured. 40 stab wounds inflicted with various sharp kitchen tools. In a deeply disturbing detail, investigators found that Andre had inserted pills into the open wounds, an act of extreme violence that shocked even seasoned professionals. It was clear from the beginning that Andre Davids was the prime suspect. At the hospital, toxicology tests confirmed the presence of multiple substances in his system. Detectives met with Andre in his hospital room. He did not resist questioning. On the contrary, he admitted to the killing and explained the events that led up to it. With remorse and despair, he also expressed a desire not to go on living. On Sunday, March 30th, 2014, after further investigation, Andre was officially arrested at the East Hollywood Sheriff's Station. He was charged with murder involving a deadly weapon and held on a $1 million bail. He was then transferred to the Twin Towers Correctional Facility in Los Angeles. News of Kirtland's murder spread quickly. The case dominated headlines and drew significant media attention. Just a week later, a separate violent incident in the same apartment complex left several people injured, sparking widespread fear among residents. Many began reconsidering whether they felt safe living there. Andre's trial began in December 2015. He faced charges of voluntary manslaughter and second-degree murder. The distinction between the two was critical, as California law required the prosecution to prove whether the crime involved express or implied malice, an essential factor in determining the severity of the sentence. Kirtland's family pushed for the most serious charge, which could result in life imprisonment. The defense countered by claiming Andre's mental state had been compromised by drug use and prescription medications. They emphasized that Andre had no prior history of violence and argued that the killing occurred in the heat of passion. A classic argument for a reduced charge in cases of crimes of emotion. The jury considered several factors, including Kirtland's expressed desire to end the relationship, which may have triggered intense emotional distress in Andre. In the end, the jury concluded that the act was not premeditated. On December 17, 2015, Andre Davids was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. The sentencing hearing took place on January 21, 2016, at the Los Angeles Superior Court. The most emotional moment came when Waylon Ma, Kirtland's older brother, addressed the court. He spoke directly to Andre, expressing the anguish and rage of losing his brother in such a brutal way. He wished that the memory of the crime would haunt Andre for the rest of his life. Under California law, involuntary manslaughter carries a sentence of 3 to 11 years. The judge imposed the maximum term, 11 years, plus an additional year for the use of a deadly weapon. The verdict deeply upset Kirtland's loved ones and many in the broader community, who viewed the sentence as far too lenient given the cruelty of the crime. Some even called for a retrial in hopes of a harsher punishment. But the U.S. Constitution's Fifth Amendment barred a second prosecution for the same offense. Andre's legal team appealed the 12-year sentence, seeking to have it reduced. The appeal was heard on November 17, 2016, by a panel of 3 judges in California's 2nd District Court of Appeal. The defense requested a mid-range sentence of 6 years. But when the deputy district attorney described the crime scene, calling it one of the most horrific she had encountered, the judges were left with no doubt. In her closing argument, the deputy district attorney emphasized Andre's danger to society. The judges upheld the original sentence, stating that the severity and brutality of the crime justified the maximum punishment allowed by law. Though Kirtland Ma is no longer physically present, his memory endures powerfully in the hearts of those who knew and loved him. Christian, in particular, has spoken about the profound pain of losing someone so special. Friends and family remember that Kirtland disliked saying goodbye, an attitude that now offers them a quiet sense of comfort. To them, his warmth, love, and luminous smile remain alive, woven into every memory and in every life he touched.
Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.